So I'm going to talk about the Internet of Things and how that might affect what you're doing, because I think it actually will, and I think it will in the pretty near term. And I think we want to help you figure out how it will. But just, you heard some of this on my bio. I obviously am steeped in science and technology myself. Spent a whole career in it, been very successful. But turns out I was born and raised on a dairy farm in very rural Minnesota, and probably would still be on that dairy farm, milking 60 cows twice a day, if I hadn't run into a couple teachers along the way. Teachers who made math and science interesting and introduced me to computers. And this was like, circa 1980. And the Apple IIe was the, computer of the day, and you had to boot the DOS and all that stuff, and it was fascinating. And I decided I want to be an engineer, and really just based on that. So really, I think that, somehow a couple of teachers entered my life. I'm thinking of Mr. Merkins and Mr. Fierro, and I just went off in a different direction, and here I am today, the CEO of a large technology company down the road. I'm happy to be here today at Framingham State because, I think this is a very inspirational place to be, and certainly a school that, I already knew this, but as I was reading through the brochure this morning, you realize just how much pioneering has happened right here on this campus. Certainly not just Krista McAuliffe, but what a great representation of the spirit of pioneering that kind of lives right here in Framingham. So this is a good theme for us to think about because at PTC, we've tried to be a pioneer in education as well. We've tried to figure out a way that we can play a role in shaping the engineers of the future. Now, let me be clear. We're a publicly traded technology company. We're in business to make money. So I'll just be frank about that. But what we've learned along the way is this concept that has been called shared value, which is there's certain investments you can make that provide a round-trip return back to you. And for our company to invest in the engineer of the future, and maybe do that by preparing teachers to touch this engineer of the future, what we're doing is we're creating a lot of goodwill. We're creating exposure to our company. People understand who we are. They get to touch our technology and see how fascinating it is. And that's a seed that takes a long time to produce fruit, but in fact, at some point it does produce fruit. So we're sort of in business to make money, but on the side we have this other program, which a couple of my colleagues run, John Stewart and Jordan Cox back in the corner. These guys, spend, particularly Jordan, it's his full-time job at PTC is, to engage with bodies like this and figure out how together we can shape what's happening in the world of STEM. So it's very exciting, and I'm happy to be here. Now, just in terms of what the company PTC does, we're down the road in Needham. I think many of you have been to PTC at this point, thanks to the programs we have. We're a company with about $1.5 billion of revenue, about 6,000 employees around the world, a market cap of about $4.5 billion. And what we do is produce software and some consulting around that helps companies change the way that they create, operate, and service products. So many of you have seen our Creo software. Creo, of course, is used to model an idea in a way that you could manufacture it, right? By creating a 3D model that accurately describes what's in your brain, you can now hand that to a factory, and they can go produce it. Or you could hand it to a 3D printer, and it could produce it right there in front of you, right in front of your eyes. So that's the create part. Now, we also have another business on the back end helping people service products, because after we've helped companies create products, we realize we understand the DNA of that product, and that understanding how that product goes together and all the bits and pieces of it is pretty darn useful when it comes time to fix it or service it or do preventative maintenance or whatnot. So some years ago, we also got in the business of helping companies to service their products. So anyway, that's what we do. Now, what happened is somewhere along the way, we came across this phenomenon of the Internet of Things. And probably everybody in the room has heard that. In fact, Internet of Things is the most hyped technology in the world right now, according to Gartner Group, having recently passed big data. which is just recently passed cloud. So right now, you're going to leave this room today, I think, knowing more about the Internet of Things than any of your friends know. So you're going to go back home and you're going to be the IoT expert. So it turns out that if you think about the Internet of Things, it's things connected to the Internet. Now, we've always had smartphones connected to the Internet and computers connected to the Internet. I'm not actually talking about those kind of things. That's a given. I'm talking about your refrigerator. I'm talking about your car. I'm talking about your house, your swimming pool, your pets, yourself connected to the Internet. And so I like to tell people, the Internet of Things is really more about the things than it is about the Internet, because the Internet isn't actually changing that much. We have the Internet. We understand what it is. It's not undergoing a radical transformation. What's undergoing a radical transformation is the refrigerators and the swimming pools and the houses and the cars and the trucks and the pets and so forth. We're changing these things so that they can connect. Now, why would you connect a thing to the Internet? It's worth just thinking about that for a minute. If you did a big study of people who are out there connecting things to the Internet, and you said, why? Why are you doing that? The number one answer would be to get a feedback loop so I can service the thing better. For example, you don't really have to change your oil every 5,000 miles. You don't really have to. It's just sometimes you need to change it at 5,000. Sometimes you need to change it at 7,000. Sometimes you can change it at 15,000. But without a feedback loop to know for sure, you better just change it at 5,000. So if you had a feedback loop, for example, to test the quality and viscosity and lubricating qualities of the oil in your car, you actually would stop changing it at 5,000 and you change it when it needs to be changed. And you'd save a lot of money. You would waste less oil. I mean, just everybody would be happier for it. So the number one reason to connect something like your car to the Internet is so you can service it better. Second reason would be so you can operate it better and operate it remotely in a lot of cases. My swimming pool's connected to the Internet at home, and that's kind of nice because normally, for example, there's both a pool and a spa. Normally, I don't want the spa heated because it takes a lot of energy, costs money, and feels wasteful. But Friday afternoon, sitting in my office, I turn the spa on so that when I get home Friday after work, we're ready to go. It's 102 degrees, everybody's happy. So anyway, you could operate it remotely. And then the third thing is you could just make it better. If you had feedback loops from products, you'd understand how are they used, how do they work, how don't they work, how do customers use them, were our requirements right, et cetera, and you'd evolve the design very quickly. Because we're used to making things that once they leave the factory, we just never hear from them again. No idea what's going on. Therefore, we can't service them, we can't operate them, and we can't perfect them. So anyway, we concluded that this Internet of Things was going to be a very big deal for PTC because I can't think of a better way to transform the way you create, operate, and service things than connect these things to the Internet to get feedback loops. Okay? So as a result, and you saw I have a long technical background, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. In fact, it's kind of been my main thought exercise over the last 2 years to try to understand what's this all about and how will it affect companies out there and thus how will it affect our company and so forth. And I did a big research project with some of my colleagues and with Professor Michael Porter, which was just recently published, just in the last week or so, as the cover story on Harvard Business Review. It's titled The Internet of Everything, Smart Connected Products Will Transform Your Business. It's worth getting a copy and reading it, or you can read it on the hbr.org website as well. But the nice thing about Harvard Business Review is it's not technobabble. It's written at a CEO, CXO level, written for business people, but not assuming that they are technology people. So it tries to take a high-level approach to describing how this phenomenon, the Internet of Things, or what we prefer to call smart connected products, is going to change the world. And we like this term smart connected products because it's more meaningful. Like if you say Internet of Things, nobody really knows what you're talking about. If you say Internet of Everything, then they're even more confused. If you say smart connected products, it starts to become more tangible. And again, the things are smart connected products. So we like this terminology better, and we try to explain why in the article and so forth. But anyway, you know, it's very exciting. This is a very prestigious magazine, and so in order to get, you know, our thoughts published on the front cover of it, it means that this is important stuff. And that's why I'm happy to share it with you today. So in the next part of my presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things that are in this article and that our research showed. So let me start by talking about smart connected products. What are they? So for thousands of years, mankind has been making and selling things, products. And these things for thousands of years have been made out of stone and wood and you know, then iron and then steel and other alloys like that, and later a little bit of rubber and then some plastic and whatnot. But they were physical things you could hold in your hand. And so for thousands of years, we've had physical things created largely by mechanical engineers and somewhat by electrical engineers, because electricity has been used for energy, like in motors, separate from using it for logic, like in computers. So I'm not talking about computers, but I am including motors and electrical stimulated things in this discussion. So just in the time frame that I've been in the business world, we've seen a transformation from physical products to smart products. Somewhere along the way, somebody got the idea that we could put a computer in these things, and we could put some software, and software could have sensors, and maybe even a user interface, and algorithms, and so forth, and then these products would become smart. Probably it started, you know, near as I can remember, in things like NASA with space programs and so forth. You know, they were the first examples where we put computers in things that were spacecraft and launch vehicles and stuff like that. But today it's everywhere. You know, my coffee maker, you turn it on. I can say what time in the morning to turn on, how strong to make the coffee, how hot to make the coffee, how much coffee to put in the cup, when to turn off. You know, all those kind of settings I can put in the coffee maker. So in the first generation, the coffee maker was a pot that you put on a fire, and it boiled water that percolated through a canister of some sort. In the second generation, it's a smart thing and you can interact with it. What's happened now is people are saying, well, if these things have computers in them, by the way, a typical automobile now has about 70 computers in it. Just think about that. It's like a data center driving down the road, because there are 70 CPUs in a typical automobile. More for very luxury automobiles, you know, fewer for low-cost automobiles, but on average about 70. So people realized if you have something with computers in it, why not give it an IP address and connect it to a network, just like every other computer, every traditional computer. And that brings this concept of smart connected products. And there's lots of ways to connect products to the internet. You could plug a cable into them. That's the obvious way, but they're not then so mobile. You could use cell phone signals, 3G, 4G, LTE type cell phone signals. Basically just embed a cell phone in them. You could use Wi-Fi. Of course, that's pretty ubiquitous these days, but not reliable as you move around. You know, reliable as you move around in your house, but not as you get on the road and drive from one place to another. There's Bluetooth. You can connect to something close by with Bluetooth, and there's other new protocols like that. And then there's home automation protocols like Zigbee and stuff like that. So lots of different ways you could connect something, and depending upon the thing and how it's used, you'd pick the right one. And then you connect to what we call a product cloud. So there's some cloud. Now cloud, you know, as you know, really just means some big computer servers running somewhere. Not here, just somewhere, don't worry where, right? That to me is the definition of cloud. It's just somewhere, okay? And it could be a public cloud, private cloud, could be on Amazon.com, it doesn't matter. Just, you know, you're talking to something up there. So this is kind of the progression of products. So I want to show you next, what does the technology stack look like for a smart connected product? Because, by the way, this stuff's all in this Harvard Business Review paper if you want to follow up and see it. There's quite a lot of technology now in a product. In fact, you know, I said for thousands of years, we were talking about things that could be modeled in 3D, and you're done. There's nothing else to do. That captures the whole thing. And then somewhere along the way, the products at the bottom went from being just physical things to being smart things, and then we had to add electronics and software, and tons of software. For example, I don't know if you know this, but when a new automobile comes out, there have been more engineers these days writing the software in that automobile than designing the steel and plastic and rubber parts. It's more software engineering already in an automobile than there is mechanical engineering. So a smart connected product has those a smart product has those bottom two boxes. But when you connect it, you get the communications box, you get the product cloud at the top, which includes a big data database where you're gathering information from everybody's swimming pool into a database of swimming pools, or a database of coffee makers, or a database of cardiac pacemakers, or what have you. There's then an application platform where you're running programs that analyze that data. Typically, people are using analytics. Analytics sort of means, okay, there's all this data, but what's it telling me? And there's two kinds of analytics. At a simple level, there's sort of the traditional rule-based analytics. Like, if your engine temperature is greater than 200 degrees, then there's a problem. Okay, if-then type stuff. And then there's what's called big data analytics. And big data analytics, this is another big buzz field all on its own. That really means looking for patterns and associations that tell you something, even if you don't understand why. For example, you might say, this product's got 15 sensors in it. And every time these sensors start to show a certain pattern, 2 weeks later, the engine fails. I don't know why, but I see it happen time after time. And from now on, every time I see that pattern of sensor readings, I'm going to intervene and do some preventative work on the engine. And that stops it from failing. So to me, that's big data. It's like the magic of finding things in data that you can act on even when you don't fully understand them, and certainly things you never would have looked for. You wouldn't have looked for it because you didn't know it existed. You can't answer a question that you're incapable of asking, basically. But big data can help you find that. And then there's applications, and in order to build these applications at the top, we have to not only connect down to the product, we have to connect over to external information sources, to other business systems, and then we have to secure this whole thing on the left. Some people have said the Internet of Things is a hacker's dream. In fact, there's some comments about our HBR paper, and one of the comments is kind of negative. It says, in the Internet of Things world, not only will people break into your bank account and steal all your money, but then they'll break into your toaster and burn your house down to hide the damage. And I don't know. I mean, I look at it and say, of course we'll have this problem, but we have the problem today with computers and smartphones, and I don't think anybody here plans to stop using computers and smartphones. We just have to keep fighting the battle against the bad guys, and it's a battle of tit for tat, because they keep getting smarter, and so do we. And it just never ends. It's very frustrating, by the way. Probably the most frustrating thing in my professional career is all this bad guy hacking stuff. I'm just so sick of it. A whole bunch of us try to make life better for people, and then a whole bunch of other people try to make it worse. And unfortunately, governments play a big role in that. But anyway, a lot of technology now goes into a smart connected product. So STEM is more important than ever. In fact, you can't just build a widget in your basement anymore and go sell it, because that widget has to have all of this stuff now in order to be contemporary. So I show you this a little bit because I want to show you how PTC's technology fits on that. And it's not really important what the product names are and so forth, but in fact, we at PTC have technology for modeling mechanical things on the bottom and for developing the software. Then we have technology we've acquired in the last year or so from a local company, Exida, for connecting that thing to the cloud. Then we have all the technology to build that cloud and to integrate external data sources and information systems, and then to secure it all. Now, I'm not trying to sell you all this, but I'm just telling you those are building blocks we could use in our education program. We could actually sit down with you and your students and help them build this whole thing. A one-off instance of it to just learn what our smart connected product's all about. I'll come back to that sort of at the end of my presentation. Okay, so the next thing that's interesting is what can you do with smart connected products that you couldn't do with smart products or even with dumb products. And it turns out there's an explosion of possibilities. And in our research, we characterize them into 4 levels. So the first thing is monitor. You can watch what's going on. The second thing is you can control. If you can watch and then send commands back, so it's a bidirectional connection, then you can control this thing. And if you can both monitor and control a thing, then you could add some algorithms to try to optimize what that thing does, make it be more efficient. And then finally, if you could monitor, control, and optimize, you could think about letting this thing make some of its own decisions and act autonomously. You know, the classic simple example in the consumer world of an autonomous smart product, now becoming a smart connected product, is the Roomba that can figure out how to vacuum your floors. It's figuring it out. Now you can connect to it. You can tell it the hours of the day it's allowed to run, you know, not while I'm sleeping, but yes, while I'm at work, that type of stuff. And you can make it even better by adding, you know, monitoring and control. So I'm going to go one level deeper in these things because I think it's interesting. So by monitoring, you know, this is an example of a smart connected pacemaker in somebody's chest. First of all, we can monitor the condition of the product. That would be like the battery. How much battery life is left in this pacemaker? Second, we can monitor the environment of the product. That's different than the condition of the product. That would be like, what's the body temperature, what's the blood pressure, stuff like that. Then the third thing is we could monitor what the product's doing, which again is different than how healthy it is and the environment it's in. That would be, in the case of a pacemaker, you know, how much electrical cardiac stimulation are we doing and on what frequency and so on and so forth. And given all that, we could then set some limits. We could say, if less than this or if more than that, then please, you know, text me on my cell phone so I'm aware. And this allows a doctor sitting in a doctor's office to be notified that one of their patients is starting to, you know, indicate some cardiac anomalies and, you know, be aware of it, perhaps log into that thing and change its setting or whatnot, you know, if appropriate, to try to make sure we don't have a cardiac arrest situation. So that's monitoring. Control, this example, by the way, is a remote-controlled doorbell, video doorbell that you can go buy, you know, various places. When somebody rings the doorbell, of course, it shows in the house, but it also shows on your smartphone. So you could have a delivery man come to your door while you're at work or at school, in your case, and when they ring the doorbell, you get a text message, and you could say, okay, go ahead and unlock it with an app on your phone. There's an app for that, basically. So by control, we mean control what the product's doing. For example, unlock the door is actually controlling the operation of the product. But we can also control what it is. We can personalize it. Back to that coffee maker, you know, personalize when it turns on, turns off, how hot, how strong, et cetera. We can kind of make it my coffee maker. I think we're going to get to the point, by the way, on this personalization thing where this is just a personal guess of mine, that automobiles are going to have glass cockpits as opposed to gauges. They're just going to have computer screens. And you're going to be able to customize this however you want. You're going to be able to put whatever gauges you want, wherever you want on this thing, and then save it. And then if you get in a different car, load your settings and have that second car look like your settings. This would be actually pretty important for car sharing, which is becoming a pretty interesting business model. Because it's hard to share cars if every time you get in one, it's all different. But if you could just save your settings, get in one, Bluetooth up, load your settings off your smartphone or something like that, car reconfigures itself and looks like your car, off you go. So I think that's interesting. Okay, then optimization, that means add these algorithms. So for example, it turns out that the right way to run a wind turbine is to constantly adjust the angle of the blades depending upon the wind speed. And if there's any pilots in the room, you know the idea of constant speed versus constant pressure propellers and things like that. So optimization would be, for example, be constantly changing the performance of that product. Always, we're turning the blades, turning the blades, turning the blades. And it's decisions made up in the cloud because we're even optimizing the algorithms for how to turn the blades. They keep getting better and better and better. So we're really using the connectedness to do this. But it would also be optimize the availability and uptime by optimizing the service and repair. And service and repair is a big thing here. I said that's actually the #1 reason to do this because I think, you know, in a human setting, it's a lot better to avoid a heart attack than to try to repair one. Just, it's a better strategy. And it turns out it's the same strategy with the engine in your car. It's a lot better to change the oil frequently than to try to fix an engine that's seized. It's just a lot better strategy. So how could we be better yet? Well, like I said with the engine, we could monitor this thing and try to intervene proactively before it happens at just the right time, not too soon. Don't change the oil every 5,000 miles, whether it's needed or not. That's a waste. But change it just in time, just before it gets to a point where it's starting to become problematic. And then also be very efficient in terms of if you have to go service something, show up with everything you need and do it in one trip. You know, I sometimes share a little joke with people, but I say if the oven in your kitchen doesn't work, it takes 2 trips to fix it, two repairman trips. First, the repairman has to come and see what oven do you have and what's wrong with it. And then he says, or she says, I'll be back because I got to go to order the parts. And then they come back a week later with the right parts and they fix your oven. And then they send you the bill, and you realize that the cost of 2 trips to fix the oven is actually more than the value of the oven. I'm serious about that. And then you say, well, what am I going to do? You know, I had to have it fixed. But that's just a very inefficient process that could be much better. So I think that this Internet of Things is going to allow us to do that. And then the last thing is autonomy. And there's a couple of different kinds of autonomy here. Let me first say this, this little fish-shaped robot is developed here in Boston by a partner company of PTC's called Boston Engineering. What it's designed to do would be either like to go retrieve something from the bottom of the ocean, or perhaps to swim under the hull of a ship and inspect the hull of the ship and so forth. But in that environment, you know, you're always dealing with currents and waves and so forth. So this thing is capable of finding a way to the destination without being told exactly where to go step by step by step. Keep adjusting for current, adjust for obstacles we didn't know were there, and so forth. So it's an autonomous system. So that's autonomous operation. We're starting to see examples of autonomous diagnostics. A good example is many diesel engines today have filters that trap particulate matter. And when these filters fill up, they need to be emptied. And so now many of these engines have the ability to purge their own filter, to basically dump all the bad stuff out of the filter, start with a clean filter, and go back to business as usual. But they do that automatically with nobody being involved. So the holy grail here would be able to act in coordination with other products and systems. You know, a whole, some people use the term swarm of things working together. But I'll give you some examples in a second here of things working together somewhat autonomously. Okay. So one of Professor Porter's, I didn't say that much about Professor Porter, but probably everybody's heard, or probably most people have heard of Professor Michael Porter from Harvard. He's the most famous professor at Harvard. He is the most senior professor, let's say, at Harvard Business School. He's well known around the world. You know, he advises companies, he advises countries. Of course, he teaches students. But he's developed some pretty famous frameworks over his career, his academic career. So one is called Porter's 5 Forces. And if you Google Porter's 5 Forces, you'll find like 5 million hits. You couldn't get an MBA today without learning Porter's 5 Forces, you know, from any school. So what this framework tries to do is to say how our industry is changing, and are the changes good or bad? You know, is the industry today good or bad industry to be in, and is it getting better or is it getting worse? And so it looks at 5 different forces that are acting on the industry. The force in the middle is how do you compete with each other? Do you compete with great differentiation and you try to say my product's better than their product, or different than their product and it's better because of this? Or do you compete based on price? The products are the same, buy the cheapest one. Competing based on price is a very difficult market to be in because the prices just keep going down and down and down. So the best markets are ones where there's plenty of room to differentiate, plenty of demand. Everybody gets, you know, the demand gets neatly sorted into different buckets. Everybody gets 1 or 2 of those buckets, sells at high prices, lots of profit, and so forth. So we think that the Internet of Things allows radical new ways to differentiate products. Just ideas you could never think of. Like, think of when Nest, you've heard of the Nest thermostat. When Nest comes into the thermostat world, suddenly the definition of thermostats is completely different. And all the old thermostats are obsolete, and everybody's off innovating brand new ideas for thermostats. And this is happening kind of all over different markets. So then if you look to the right, the second force would be when you're looking downstream toward your customers, who has more power in the relationship between you and your customers? If you have commodity products, then the customers have all the power. On the other hand, if you have monopolies or or highly differentiated products, then you have a lot of power. For example, historically, Microsoft's had a lot of power. They've said, hey, Windows is the operating system of choice. Office is the office productivity suite of choice. There aren't good alternatives. You kind of have to pay whatever I'm charging, right? On the other hand, you know, if you're buying something that's pure commodity, there's a lot of price negotiation, and that, you know, makes the business less attractive to be in. If you go to the left side, you look upstream to your suppliers, and you say, who has the most power there? Let me first close out. Internet of Things changes the buyer relationship a lot because you finally know what your customers do with your products. You know in a fine-grained way what they do. You know if they use the product a lot, don't use the product, how they use it. You know if they might need more product or an accessory to be added to the product or a replacement product. You know, you have such information about products that you never had before. A good example is a company like Whirlpool makes appliances. They don't actually know today who their customers are because they ship those appliances to Home Depot or Sears, who puts a Kenmore label on them or something like that. And Home Depot and Sears sell those products to end consumers, but they don't go back and tell Whirlpool who they sold them to. So Whirlpool says, I have no idea how my products are used. But as soon as they become smart and connected and connect back to my Whirlpool cloud, I know exactly who has them, exactly how they use them. I know how often they use the hot cycle. I know how often they use the extra dirty cycle. You know, I know that they do laundry on Thursday evenings and not elsewhere during the week and so forth. So it's a very interesting change in the relationship with customers. Actually, the product becomes a sensor in the relationship with the customer. It tells you about that relationship. So it's pretty exciting. Now, if you back up to suppliers, what's sort of happening there is as all this new technology I talked about in that technology stack enters the picture, most of that has to be purchased from somebody rather than developed internally. And if you think about a company, I'll take an example of a customer of ours, Cummins Engine. So Cummins Engine makes big diesel engines that you'd see in over-the-road trucks or in big generators or something like that. They've been making engines for more than 100 years. They know everything about blocks and crankshafts and connecting rods and pistons. And you know, if you want to talk mechanical stuff, they can talk your ear off. Change the discussion for a moment to smart and connected, and they're going, blah, 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 I don't know what to say. We haven't done that for 100 years. We don't know much about it. We're going to have to go buy that technology from somebody. That means that their suppliers are getting a lot more powerful, because the most important stuff they're now putting in their products, they're buying from somebody else. And you'd like it if the most differentiating part of your product was something you produced, because you control it. But if you're buying it from somebody and they also sell it to your competitors, then you say, hey, I don't want to pay that price. And then they say, well, fine, I'll just sell it to your competitor. And you say, oh, don't do that. You know, that'll be bad. So let's keep talking about the price. Then finally, there's a piece on the top called threat of substitute products and a piece on the bottom called barriers to entry. Let's hit barriers to entry first. Barriers to entry in general are going up with smart connected products because, like I said, you can't just make a widget in your basement and take it to market anymore. You're going to have to figure out connectivity and all that cloud stuff and security stuff and integration stuff. I mean, it's just the definition of a product became bigger and more complex. Now, on the other hand, products need to change, and some incumbent producers of products will fail to get the message, and they won't change their products. Then there's an opportunity for them to be leapfrogged. And if they're leapfrogged, that's an entry point for a new entrant to come in, align with the contemporary definition of products when the incumbent failed to do so. And that'll certainly happen in some industries. Threat of substitute products and services, the biggest thing there's a lot of detail I'm glossing over here, just hitting some high points. But the biggest thing there is business model changes. So I saw out in the parking lot spaces for zip cars. And if you're familiar with that concept, that's a new business model for personal transportation. The old model is you buy your car. The new model is you just use one and pay for the use. That's because if you think about it, cars are the second most expensive asset that consumers own, house being the first, car being the second. But if you look at how much is that car utilized, not much at all. Half-hour drive to work in the morning, half-hour drive home, parked 23 hours that day. And so what if a car could be utilized 12 hours a day instead of 1? Well, the cost of owning cars would drop precipitously. By the way, the number of cars we need to manufacture in the world would drop precipitously too. So what Zipcar and many other similar things starting up now are doing, they're saying you don't have to buy a car. I've got a whole bunch of them, they're staged all over, and because they're connected, I know where they are and whether or not they're in use or available for you. I can guide you to the closest car, and you can just pay me a monthly fee for the right to drive a car, and you don't have to buy one. And the monthly fee for the right to drive one is far less than the cost of ownership for buying and maintaining one of your own. So that would be a different business model, and you could see some industries suffering a lot, like the car industry. Instead of producing, I think we produce about 30 million cars a year right now, maybe that would drop to 10, because we just don't need so many cars. We're using them much more efficiently. So anyway, lots of changes to the industry. That's sort of the point here, is that this Internet of Things phenomenon is going to have big impacts on industries. A second thing that's happening is the very definition of industry is changing. So let me take you through an example, and I hope you can see this slide. But on the left, it says a simple product. So I'm going to use a real company here, John Deere. So John Deere has been making tractors for also, I think, 175 years, if I remember correctly. Well, they started making plows, but they've been making agriculture equipment. So for many years, though, they made simple tractors that weren't smart. They were just mechanical things. And then over time, their products started to become smart. They had a digital dashboard, an engine control unit, some stuff like that. Sensors to tell you if you're running out of gas, or if the oil pressure is too high, or the hydraulic pressure is too low, and stuff like that. That'd be the second stage. Then it occurred to John Deere that there's good reasons to connect those type of products to the internet, so you can remotely monitor and do all those things I talked about. So then you get smart connected products. At that point, John Deere is still a tractor company. But then we go to this next idea, which we would call a product system. Now, I'm a farm boy, so I know this example pretty well, but basically at the bottom is this thing called a combine harvester. So a combine harvester harvests grain from a field, and it combines the function of reaping and threshing. Reaping means separating the head or the ear from the stalk, and threshing means separating the hulls and the cobs and the husks from the actual kernels of grain, so that at the end you end up with kernels of grain. That's what you make flour and stuff out of. So in order to get kernels of grain, you have to combine reaping and threshing, and there's big self-propelled machines that do that, called combines. Big, huge, basically factories driving down a field, processing. So it turns out that these smart connected combines now are monitoring how many kernels came from this little patch of land, and how many kernels came from this little patch of land, and how many kernels came from this little patch. And they're sending that all to a database in the cloud, because next spring, the planting equipment wants to know that for a couple reasons. So first, the tractor hooks up to a tiller. Tiller basically means plow or cultivator or something like that. And they want, as they're working the soil, they're frequently fertilizing it, particularly with nitrogen. So they're saying if yield was low, then nitrogen application should be high in this little spot. But in this next little spot, yield was high, so back off on the nitrogen because we're just wasting nitrogen, and so forth. So they're going through doing a smart planting scheme. And then along comes the tractor pulling the planter, putting the seeds in the ground, the kernels again, for next year's crop. And it's doing the same thing. It says I should use a different seed in this spot because I think it's too dry, and so I'm going to use a drought-resistant seed here, and I'm going to use a, think of like if you plant tomatoes. I see there's a garden out there. There's like a gazillion different types of tomatoes you can plant. If you're worried about blight, you plant these, not those, and you want slicing tomatoes versus canning tomatoes and so forth. So lots of different kinds of seeds, and the planter can be making smart decisions for this spot versus that spot versus that spot and so forth. So we call that a product system. This is products working together now, sharing data between them. And it's a real breakthrough, for example, in farming, because you can now correlate your inputs and your outputs, and you can reduce your inputs while maximizing your outputs, and quite frankly, that means productivity, which means profit. So it's a good idea to do it. Now you go to the next level, and somebody comes along and says, yeah, that's a great planting and harvesting system, but turns out farms do more than planting and harvesting. They also might do fertilizing, and they might do irrigation, and they buy and sell things, and maybe we could have a smart farm system where, depending upon commodity prices, we plant different seeds. And then when the seeds are growing and we're irrigating them, if the farm irrigates, we're going to say, well, there's sensors in the soil, and depending upon how much actual moisture is there already, we're going to apply more or less water to every little spot. And by the way, we're going to look at the weather forecast coming from Yahoo Weather or USDA or whatever, and we're going to say, if moisture is not critical and there's an 80% chance of rain tomorrow, then don't irrigate at all. And now we have a smart farm. So it turns out John Deere has done all of this. John Deere now went from selling tractors to now they're selling sophisticated information systems for running smart farms. So a company like John Deere has to stop and ask, what business am I actually in now? Because somewhere along the way, John Deere became a software company and a systems integrator. Now, whether or not that strategy will ultimately work, we'll see. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, because the farther away you get from building tractors, the less sort of institutional knowledge you know how to do it. For example, Accenture might end up competing, I'm sorry, John Deere might end up competing with Accenture. Accenture is a big IT systems integrator who hooks computer systems together. And Accenture looks at that thing on the right and says, that's just an IT project. And I don't need to build tractors. In fact, tractors are only 5% of it. So the fact that I don't build tractors doesn't matter. I can build software systems, integrated software systems pretty well. So John Deere might find the farther away they go, the more they're competing with people that are completely unlike them. Anyway, very interesting phenomenon that's happening. Smart homes, you've probably seen. This is happening in automobiles, smart automobiles. It's just happening everywhere you turn, very subtly and slowly. Okay, so here's a fun example, Nike. Just an example of that phenomenon. Historically, Nike made shoes and clothes and sunglasses. And then they started putting sensors in shoes and clothes, and they started creating things like their, what does Nike call it, the Fuel Band? Yeah, Fitbit, Fuel Band, whatever. But in Nike's case, I think it's called the Fuel Band. That's the little thing you wear on your watch. And then they decided, we could connect the sensors from the shoes and clothes into the cloud along with the sensors from the Fuel Band. And then the point is, by the time you get to the right side, Nike's like a healthcare company. Right? They're actually helping people maintain physical fitness. It's not really about shoes and clothes anymore. So this is a real-world example along with John Deere of how the world's changing out there. So the second framework that's very famous from Professor Porter is the value chain framework. So probably everybody in the room has heard the term value chain. You've probably used the term value chain. Certainly in business we use it all the time. Sort of means the sequence of how things pass from one person or department to the next and what value do they add and so forth. If Professor Porter invented the term value chain, and if we had to all pay him a penny every time we used the term value chain for the last 30 years, he'd be off the charts rich man. I think he's doing fine irregardless, but it's just such a common thing to think about these days. So we looked at, okay, if that's the value chain for a firm, how is that value chain changed by smart connected products? And I just want to cherry pick a few things. So if we start with the horizontal piece called technology development, well, the whole concept of developing a product, if you think back to that technology stack, is very, very different. And not only do you need a lot more technology, but you need different skills, and you need different concepts. For example, if tractors are like computers, then we should be able to upgrade them 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. So we should start thinking about tractors more like computers running software that can be upgraded later. We got to design them with that idea in mind. Your automobile, we ought to be able to upgrade it multiple times, and it keeps getting better, and bugs keep going away the longer you own it. If we look at after-sales service, we should just go back to the drawing board on how service is done, because now that we have feedback loops, we could do it so much better, back to the oven example. Or if we pick marketing and sales, we know everything about the customer now. And so we can use that to inform the way that we do marketing and sales. But if I jump up to one last one, which is human resource management, this is actually where you guys come in here, which is the demand for people that understand this type of technology is just now going off the charts. Because it's not just software company that want to hire great software developers and technologists and so forth. It's John Deere, it's Nike, it's everybody. So the demand for people that understand that technology stack or pieces of it is just going to be off the charts in the next, decade or two. It's already high, but what I'm saying is the demand is about to just explode. There's already high demand, and these people are expensive and hard to get, and they get 5 job offers. But it's about to explode because iRobot wants them, John Deere wants them, Otis, the company that makes elevators that go up and down and escalators, they want them. Everybody's going to want them. And so I think there's a real opportunity here, or a real need, for the STEM community to start producing a lot more of these people and to produce people that kind of understand this big picture that I'm talking about. Okay, so just to wrap up this piece about our research, so I don't run out of time, we boiled it down to 10 big questions that companies ought to think about, and I'll just tick through them quickly. So the first question is, what capabilities should you produce in your product? How should your products change? And this is a thing companies have to be careful about because it turns out customers won't pay for everything. There's an explosion of new possibilities, but people won't pay for them all. I'll give you an example. There's a water heater company called A.O. Smith, and they make water heaters that you'd have in the basement of your home, and they make water heaters that would be in, like, let's say on this campus. And it turns out that they can sense now when a water heater is going to fail. And they could notify you, hey, your water heater is starting to approach a point of failure. And that would be nice to know. The problem is in a consumer setting, water heaters on average fail once every 12 years. So what will you be willing to pay to be told 12 years from now through an email that your water heater is approaching a failure? The answer is nothing, because you probably won't even live in the house 12 years from now. The email address probably won't even work 12 years from now. You just say, forget it. That's not worth anything to me. Now, if you're the physical department who runs this campus, it's worth knowing if the water heaters aren't going to work because we can't serve lunch that day. So I'll pay for that. Even if it's 12 years away, that day will come, and there will be a physical department here monitoring that water heater, and by God, I want to know if it's going to fail so that we don't have a disaster on the campus. So that's an example there. The second thing is how much of the product should you put in the product, and how much of the product should you put in the cloud? And this is an interesting example using a local company here called Bose. Bose has been selling these wave radio type things forever, and they've just undergone a radical change. Because the traditional one on the top had basically a music source, which was a CD player, a amplifier, a speaker, and a user interface. And you can see the user interface is a little cryptic. Just a bunch of buttons you got to push. And if you ever tried to set the alarm on one of those things in a hotel room, you just get exasperated. So now, in the new generation of these things, the device has 6 big buttons and 4 little ones, and a smartphone app. So there is no CD. It's streaming music from the cloud. So the actual music source has moved from physical up into the cloud. The user interface runs on a smartphone or on your computer or your tablet. And all you do on the computer or the tablet or the smartphone is you pre-program what those 6 buttons do. So that it's like in the old cars, or still in cars, but remember when you had the buttons you push to go to your favorite radio station. So now you can say, like, when I push this button, go to Pandora and play my favorite streaming music channel. And when I push this button, I want you to go pick that French radio station out of Paris that I used to listen to when I lived in Europe. And I want you to play that, and so forth. So you're just kind of like saying what the button should do. And then there's a louder, quieter, and an on-off button. So basically the user interface is so much more elegant. It's way more powerful, yet far simpler than it ever was before, because the user interface has essentially migrated out of the product and up into the cloud. It's the old beeping, blinking VCR problem. 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock. That years ago, I mean, these things are kind of obsolete now. But years ago, you'd buy the VCR, you'd have a power outage, you'd blink 12 o'clock, you'd set it, get out the manual, and try to figure out the cryptic sequence to set it back to the right time, and then the power would fail again, you'd say, just let it blink. Right? And we've all seen that. But that's changing because user interfaces are leaving products and migrating up into the cloud. So when I want to set my coffee maker settings, I don't want that cryptic little turning buttons and knobs and dials. I just want to go to a smartphone, simple to use app, tell my coffee maker how to work, then it works that way. That's an example. Okay, the third question is, should the company pursue an open or proprietary and closed approach? This is an interesting question, and what we really see is that most companies, for controlling their own products, are pretty closed. Like Bose doesn't want anybody else's software to be able to control that Bose speaker. They want to make sure you buy both the software and the hardware elements of that system. And therefore, there's no way to intercept the protocol between them. And most people are doing that. And then if they go to a product system, like John Deere might make the connection between the combine and the planters and the tillers closed. If you want this idea, you got to buy it all from me. Not just the tractor, but also the tiller, the planter, and the combine. You have to buy from me if you want that great benefit Jim just told you about. So we're going to keep that closed. But sooner or later, it becomes impractical to keep it closed, and you have to make it open, because your system will become part of an even bigger system if it's open. And if it can't do that, it'll be rejected by the even bigger system. So this is a key question. By the way, if you want to play with Internet of Things that are really interesting, this Philips Hue light bulb, this is worth having in your classroom. It costs about $100 to buy this pack of 3 light bulbs, which you can buy from the Apple iStore, or iTunes store, I guess it is. And what it is that each of those light bulbs is independently controllable. You can say, is it on or off, which color, and how bright, for 3 light bulbs. So you'd say, well, who cares? Well, it kind of turns out you can do pretty interesting things with that. And they have an open interface to it. So many people have now written programs that drive those light bulbs. For example, one program says, associate your favorite 3 stock prices to it. So when you walk in the room, you know how your portfolio is doing. That one's green, that one's yellow, that one's red. That's kind of interesting. Or it could be depressing. That's true. You could maybe find a way to interface it to the Fitbits and fuel bands your kids are wearing. You know, are they active, not active? You know, and just all kinds of crazy ideas can be done, and it's pretty fun to play with. I bought one of those sets myself. Okay, the next question is what data to capture and analyze to make the products better. And you know, this is a bit the question of it costs money to capture data, and then it costs money to transmit data. And so be careful thinking more is better, because more means it costs more. The question is, does it generate more value? And then there's some other points here too, like if you look at that Nest thing, this is the Nest thermostat the company Google bought for billions of dollars. There's also privacy issues here too, which is how much does your customer want you to collect? Like a lot of people have said, I don't really want Google to know what goes on in my home. They already know every time I pull out my phone, if it runs Android, or I get on my computer and I search on Google, they know all that. Now they also understand the temperature habits of my house, and you know, when I'm apparently home and not home, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure I like that. So anyway, next question is how do you manage and protect access to the information you are collecting? So these products collect all kinds of information. And so the first question is, who owns it? Is it your information as a consumer, or is it the manufacturer's information? How many of you have seen a click-through agreement where you get to the point that says you must approve the terms, and you start reading it and you go, oh my God. It's just 20 pages of lawyer mumbo-jumbo garbage that's indecipherable anyway. So you just say, I approve, right? Well, you don't actually know what you approve, but in a lot of cases, you just turned over everything. That company now has basically unlimited rights, not only to know what you're doing, but to sell it to other people. So we think there needs to be some new standards in this area around this. It's an important, scary point. Also, there's a big vulnerability for companies that collect this data. If you think about what happened at Target last Christmas, right, or more recently at Home Depot, you know, people hacked into Target's data systems, stole credit card information and so forth, and lots of people's credit cards were compromised. And so we're all angry at Target. But Target's a victim. Target didn't do anything. A bad guy did something to Target. And we're angry at Target because they didn't protect themselves well enough from the bad guys. But you know, that's blaming the victim. We're just second-level victims, right? But anyway, companies, if they're going to accept this data, they then have an obligation to protect it. And it's hard to protect it because the hackers and the bad guys are so sophisticated and they're evolving even faster than the rest of us. Okay, the next question is, should the company sell information it gathers? Like I said, you know, Google may very well be selling information about how your heating home habits, you know, to other people. And when you use that Fitbit, and it knows where you are and when you're in that area and so forth, you know, suddenly you're going to start getting coupons from the local Starbucks saying, hey, you're in the neighborhood, why don't you swing by? And you're going to say, how do you know I'm in the neighborhood? Well, turns out that I subscribe to a service from, you know, the company that makes the Fitbit, and for a little bit of money, they tell me everybody who's in the neighborhood here that I can reach out to. So, you know, kind of an interesting question there. Then the next question for companies is, how broad do you go with this? Because it's so tempting to just say, wow, look what I could do. You know, I could go from tractors to smart farms. And it's just a natural, logical progression of thought that gets me there. Whirlpool says I can go from appliances to smart homes. Nike says I can go from shoes to healthcare management. There's just a progression that gets me there. And you know, we think it's a very interesting opportunity and somewhat of a dangerous threat that one outruns their supply lines and ends up in trouble with a big expensive strategy that won't work. Next question is, should one try to create all this technology, or should you buy it from somebody? So John Deere was very early. All of their equipment is connectable, if not connected. They develop vast amounts of technology themselves. The good news is they own it all. The bad news is they now have to compete with the Mongolian horde of software companies who are all trying to do this better than them. And I don't know if they actually can, over a period of years, keep up, because they won't be able to invest the kind of money that others are investing. On the other hand, Audi joined a consortium of companies who want to make automobiles Android-based. So they're basically saying, you know, your car is just a big tablet with wheels. And it runs apps, and you know, we're just, rather than try to develop all this stuff ourselves, we're just going to buy Android from Google. Big ecosystem of people will supply other technologies, and off we go. Next question is, should one think about changing its, you know, or disintermediating some of its service or selling partners? So think about it. Automobiles are sold through dealerships. Dealerships are big and expensive, and you know, when you listen to Herb Chambers and who's the other guy down on Route 1? Ernie Bach Jr., yeah. I mean, these are wealthy, wealthy, wealthy guys, right? And they don't make cars, they just sell them and service them. And they make a lot of money selling and servicing them. Well, it turns out that if your products are connected, then you actually have what I call digital proximity to your customer, which might replace the need for physical proximity. Because the dealers were designed to put you close to the customer. You know, it turns out Ford doesn't, or let's take Lexus, because I have a Lexus I bought from Herb Chambers. Lexus doesn't produce cars here in Boston, so there's no Lexus factory anywhere nearby. So Herb Chambers, down on Route 1, sells Lexuses for the Toyota company that makes the Lexus brand and gets a big cut of money for it. But Lexus could now say, well, let's take a real example, Tesla. So Tesla is this new electric car, and everybody thinks of an electric car. You should think of it as a connected car, because it's the most connected car out there. And in fact, it's one of the most connected products out there. A good example is there was an accident. The Teslas have a very safe driving record right now. Very, very safe. One of them, though, in the last year or so, was in a small accident, and it ended up going over a curb. And as it did, it scraped against a piece of steel that ripped open the battery, and the battery sparked or something like that, and the car started on fire. Now, the driver got out, and, you know, but the car burned up. And all the guys in Detroit were saying, thank God. You know, these things are dangerous too. So Tesla said, no, they're not. We have a fix for it. We're just going to send a software patch out to all the cars to tell the suspensions to raise them up by 3 inches. And so instantly, the whole fleet of Teslas have 3 inches of extra clearance, which reduces the statistical odds of that happening again, you know, dramatically. So problem fixed, Detroit. Let's see you do that, right? Pretty interesting. So Tesla has no dealers. If you want to buy a Tesla, you go to the mall in Natick, and you go to one of their little stores, and there's a couple models sitting in there, and if you like it, you place an order, and one shows up. And when it's time to service it, they come to your house. And you don't have to call them, because they know. They know when it's time to service it. So they'll call you and say, hey, I want to do some work on your battery because there's a problem developing. And I noticed that you're typically not driving it in the afternoons. So can I swing by tomorrow afternoon and fix your battery? Pretty interesting. Tesla has the highest customer satisfaction right now in the automotive industry without dealers. And they have been sued every which way from Sunday by the dealers associations to say you have to have dealers. And their attitude is, this is the United States of America. I don't have to have dealers. The only place they've lost the lawsuit is in Michigan. but here in Massachusetts, in fact, they don't have dealers. And then last question, I think this is the last question, is should the company change its business model? Should you think about not selling bicycles, but providing a bicycle sharing service? That's a very different business model. It may be a better business model. I'll give you some examples, though, from other places. In the world of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, this is the heating and air conditioning stuff you put in houses or buildings. Lots of equipment there that's complex and needs to be serviced and so forth. Some companies have said, you don't have to buy it anymore. Like for this campus, they could come and say, you don't have to buy the equipment. You just pay me to keep your buildings comfortable. Because after all, that's why you have that equipment. And I could manage this whole thing a lot better if you just get out of the way. So I'll keep the equipment. It's my equipment. I'll service it the way I want to service it. You just pay me for the end result, which is your buildings are comfortable. And you know what? If I fail to make them comfortable, you don't have to pay me as much. But you're basically paying for the utility of the product, not for the product. That's what these hubway bicycles in Boston are all about. You're paying for transportation, not for the right to own a piece of steel and rubber. And it turns out, for a lot of people, they only wanted transportation in the first place. So it's a better business model. OK. So just kind of moving to wrap up here, and I'm sorry, I'm actually running a little long. So people have talked about how big this phenomenon is. If you look at the green circle, that represents the number of people on Earth. In 2010, there were 5 billion. 2020, there's projected to be 7 billion people. In 2035, 9 billion. If you look at the number of devices connected, in 2010, 1 in 5 people had a computer or a smartphone connected to the internet. This is Cisco data. Cisco's projecting that by 2020, every person on average will have about 7 devices. Their computer, tablet, smartphone, car, refrigerator, what have you. And by 2035, 1 trillion devices. So we look at it and say, yeah, don't forget, there's also going to have to be an explosion in applications developed to make all this stuff work, because those 1 trillion devices are going to need a whole lot of applications to make them tick as well. So bottom line is, this is a big change. What I tried to convince you, and what the Harvard Business Review article tries to convince corporate executives is the world's going through a radical change. And I think in change lies opportunity. If I think about the things in my career that have made me successful, it's seeing a point of flux and trying to understand what will the world be like on the other side and going there and creating something for that world and then finding out you're the only one that has it. So we think that there will be, like I said, millions of new apps, lots of new technology, new business models, and new businesses created, and so forth. And we think that the challenge / opportunity is education, because we need to produce a whole lot of people that understand this new world in order for this new world to happen. And of course, that's why we're here with you guys. So just a closing thought. There's a program we're pulling together at PTC, which would be a classroom experience to make your own smart connected product almost from scratch. To just learn the idea of one. The whole stack, though. And so John and Jordan have this program pioneered. It's not quite in full-scale production, but it's in limited production right now. But the idea is you'd have your student envision a smart connected product, something simple, because we're trying to get the plumbing idea down, not the final product. And you could then model the mechanical bits of this thing in our Creo software and print them out on a 3D printer. And it might just be an enclosure or something like that. Wouldn't have to be a mechanism, but it could be. That's just more complicated. Then you could attach sensors to that thing. And it turns out there's a lot of IoT starter kits out there, some as low as $20, which give you a set of sensors. And these sensors could be glued on or taped on or whatever, you know, adhesive on to this thing you printed. And then you could connect them to a simple computer. You may be aware of this thing called a Raspberry Pi. There's a few other alternatives, but a Raspberry Pi is a credit card-sized computer that costs about $35. And it has the capability to read all these sensors, connect to Wi-Fi, and supply information back and forth. So I'm up to about $55 now, plus the cost of the printing medium, I guess, in the 3D printer. Then you could connect that thing, that smart connectable thing, to what we call our device cloud. That's this database in the sky. So we would allow students to connect into our database in the sky. They could then use our software to connect to their thing, see it's there, monitor what it's doing, and so forth. And then down to step 8, start to write their own applications. Like, I don't want to just know where it is and what the sensor readings are. I want to ask, you know, kind of more traditional questions. Like back to that pacemaker. What's the battery? What's the blood pressure? What's the body temperature? What's the cardiac stimulation rate? How can I monitor, control, optimize, and automate that if appropriate? And again, you know, the idea is try to get you to the point where you've actually developed a simple smartphone app that through a cloud monitors and controls a simple smart connected product that you also created. And then from there, you understand the big picture. You could go anywhere with it. Now, we're excited about this. We think it's practical. It's been pioneered by a college intern, basically, for us this summer, and then we're in the process of productizing it. So we've watched a college intern go through this whole process, figuring it out for the first time. We're trying to just simplify it and package it and so forth. But one of the things we're very excited about is that we think that Massachusetts in general, and you know, Boston in particular, can be the hub for Internet of Things phenomena in the world. Because we, PTC, have a big lead here. There's another company in town called LogMeIn that's a pretty substantial player. You know, Harvard's now taken a position with this research work we've done. And there's a conversation going on of could some of us in industry and some of us in academia try to create, like, you know, an IoT center of some sort that would become renowned and really make Boston and Massachusetts the hub of where people want to be if you're trying to create the smart connected things that do all those you know, wonderful possibilities I've been talking about. So I think something's going to happen at that level. And I think, you know, perhaps including all of you in that might be interesting. You know, that you're feeding talent into that. You know, people coming out of high schools and so forth already saying, I've done all that stuff. You know, I can make my own smart connected product. Now I just have to decide which of society's problems am I going to go solve with it, right? I exactly know how to do it. I just need to know precisely what I'm going to do. But the concept's completely understood. So, okay, so I think I'm way over time here. I should, for the benefit of your agenda, wrap up. And I apologize for running over, but thank you very much for this opportunity to come talk to you.